Trazyn the Infinite, a Necron overlord from the Warhammer 40k universe. This legendary creature is extremely dangerous and can win on turn 1. This is EDH Most Wanted, Trazyn the Infinite.
Welcome to the Spellcast. Trazyn the Infinite is a mono-black legendary artifact creature that can take the activated abilities of any artifacts in your graveyard and use them as his own. He essentially turns the graveyard into his own personal armory and arsenal. With Trazyn in play, the following cards in the graveyard give Trazyn some form of protection: Amaranthine Wall, Patchwork Gnomes, Masticore, Sparkhunter Masticore, Living Wall. All these provide some form of regeneration or indestructibility. Mirage Mirror is a special case, because most removal spells affect a permanent type, or specifically omit a permanent type. Using the Mirror's ability through Trazyn will turn him into any other viable permanent, preferably a land, thus changing his type, and will cause a spell targeting him to fizzle, and any creature/artifact board wipe will miss him. Now let's take a look at Trazyn's arsenal. With these cards in the graveyard, Trazyn goes on the offense. Some of these weapons are so devastating that you should have one of the aforementioned armors in effect. Rocket Launcher, best used when Trazyn has some form of protection. This can one-shot most creatures due to Trazyn having Death Touch. Goblin Cannon, if you're unfamiliar with this card, the wording is misleading. You can pump infinite mana into this, stacking the triggers before you are forced to sacrifice it. This is more of a win now card. Not as good as Rocket Launcher, but still has its place. Masticore, another one-shot creature sniper for 2 mana when the ability is used by Trazyn. Walking Ballista, a widely used combo card, pumping infinite mana into it, or Trazyn, if Walking Ballista is in the graveyard, can win you the game. And Nevinyrral's Disc. Because the disc simply destroys nearly everything, if we have one of the armors in effect, we can use the disc's ability through Trazyn each turn if we want to, wiping the board of everything except lands and planeswalkers. Since the deck we're building is mono-black, it will be strong offensively but will lack interaction and defense. For that, we add protection in the form of Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, Warping Whale, Commander's Plate, and Mithril Coat. We add defense in the form of Defense Grid, Conqueror's Flail, No Mercy, and in my build, I put 7 board wipes in there. Yeah, 7. Trazyn enables combos galore. Several of these you may have heard of or used before, using them together while they're in play. Trazyn, however, takes an alternate approach. Let's take a look. You can use Jinxed Choker and Magistrate's Scepter, both in the graveyard, to get infinite turns. You can use Walking Ballista and Phyrexian Devourer, both in the graveyard, for mass or lethal damage to all your opponents, and this doesn't require haste or tapping. You can use Pili Pila, Farmstead Gleaner, Voltaic Construct, Staff of Domination, plus Thrawn Dynamo, Gilded Lotus, Scepter of Eternal Glory, or Mana Vault in the graveyard for infinite mana. If you use Staff of Domination, you can get infinite life and infinite card draw. You can use Masticore or Rocket Launcher in the graveyard, which lets you one-shot creatures with 2 mana. Having Masticore in the graveyard also lets you regenerate Trazyn. You can use Nevinyrral's Disc with Amaranthine Wall, Living Wall, or Patchwork Gnomes for repeated board wipes. you can use Rings of Brighthearth plus Basalt Monolith for infinite colorless mana. This is a long combo that's widely explained in several different places. There's the Metalworker plus Staff of Domination combo for infinite mana, and then there's also Mystic Forge plus Sensei's Divining Top plus Yugen the Ineffable for infinite draw. Once you have infinite mana, you can use Walking Ballista or Goblin Cannon or Rocket Launcher to win the game. Goblin Cannon only works once, but you can stack its activations as many times as your mana allows. If you use Rocket Launcher instead, you can just use it and regenerate Trazyn after you use it. I'm going to post up here a chart detailing how a number of graveyard combos work with Trazyn, because there are a lot of them. So as you can see from this chart, if we have Trazyn in play, and we have any one of each of these columns in the graveyard, we can get infinite mana, infinite damage, and pretty much just win the game. We can expedite this strategy by way of tutors that send cards directly to the graveyard. We've got Buried Alive, Disciples of Gix, Gravebreaker Lamia, Violent Tumor, Auric Lore Mage, Angel of Suffering to mill us there, Final Parting, Unmarked Grave, and Entomb. If you're able to cast Buried Alive or Disciples of Gix, you can search for Pilipala, Palladium Mirror, and Walking Ballista and put them directly into the graveyard for a win. Trazyn is one of the most dangerous commanders you could possibly encounter. His methods are so devastating that with the right tools, he can execute an entire table on turn 1 with 4 cards in hand. Let's walk you through it. So you play Lion's Eye Diamond. You play Jeweled Lotus or Mishra's Workshop if you can afford one. You sacrifice the Lion's Eye Diamond, discard your hand for 3 black mana. You sacrifice the Jeweled Lotus for 3 more black mana. You cast Trazyn the Infinite. Now, when you discarded your hand with the Lion's Eye Diamond, you were discarding Walking Ballista and Phyrexian Devourer and whatever else you had. Now with Trazyn in play, you can activate Phyrexian Devourer's ability, exiling all cards in your deck, giving Trazyn +1/+1 counters equal to the combined total CMC of your deck. Now the caveat here is that the cards in your deck must have a total CMC of at least about 140, so that when you activate the Phyrexian Devourer's ability, you will exile your entire deck, and he will get +1/+1 counters equal to all the CMCs of all the cards you exile. So that has to equal enough to kill all of your opponents, because the next thing you do is you activate the Walking Ballista's ability, removing +1/+1 counters to deal 1 damage per counter. So you have 120 CMC, that's 120 counters, 40 damage to 3 opponents. End of game. It should be noted here that there are many methods of discarding and total destruction worked into this deck. These are intentional. By now it's obvious we're looking to abuse a graveyard, so sending stuff there, either by discarding or casting, then later destroying, works to your benefit. Focus first on getting a single method of protection into the graveyard, like Amaranthine Wall or Masticore or Patchwork Gnomes. The graveyard tutors are perfect in their roles here. Don't rush to dump every single thing into the graveyard you can, as people who play against this deck will know or will realize very quickly that they need to exile your graveyard as soon as possible. Graveyard hate isn't as prevalent as it once was, and the deck is built with a lot of redundancy for this very reason. Don't be deterred by the cost of some of the cards in my deck list. You can still build an extremely effective Trazyn without the expensive stuff. My deck list, which you'll find a link to in the description, is the most hardcore version of it that I could build. And I've been playing the game for 20 years or so. But that's all for the Spellcast today. Thank you for coming. Have a good night.